Irina Zarutska was stabbed to death on the rail system in Charlotte, North Carolina.
Sources here appear that Charlie Kirk has been killed.
Legends never die when the world is calling you. Can you hear them screaming out your name?
The leftists take to the street. They're the first ones to go, we're going to go out here and do a thing. It's much harder to get the right-wingers out on the streets because they have families and jobs and church to go to.
We never lose hope when everything's cold and the fighting's near. Won't stop progress. Legends never die when the world is calling you. Can you hear them screaming out your name? Legends never die. They become the part of you. Every time you breathe,
I'm tired also of the term mental illness being used as a cover for criminality. When a thug targets a woman, that is not insane. He knows she's weaker.
Days ago, here in Orem, Utah, one of the most prominent conservative organizers in America, Charlie Kirk, was assassinated.
We never lose hope when everything's cold and the fighting's near. Won't stop progress. Legends never die when the world is calling you. Can you hear them screaming out your name? Legends never die. They become the part of you. Every time you breathe, reaching greatness. Legends never die.
Greetings and salutations, everyone. This is your weekly Warcast. Today, we have a special guest on by the name of Cappy. He is a Substack writer on politics and philosophy. He's also the organizer, or one of the organizers, for the National Media Conference, and is a former defense contractor. I've met him personally, outstanding guy, and yeah, we're going to have a little bit of a back and forth and a nice little conversation about some current events and outlooks on things in America and the world after the Charlie Kirk killing. Just a quick side, let me do some of the show stuff as usual. We're live on Odyssey, Rumble, Entropy, and Twitter today. Little spicy talk here, so I'm not going to risk it on YouTube. People that are interested, join our chat, which is public at Telegram at t.me/RadioRuinChat, and the channel which I post most frequently on is on Telegram at the Warcast. I am posting a little bit more on Twitter, but you can find me there at the Warcast RR. For everyone else, please like and share the show as usual. We're not taking any donations. Just go and please give any money you have to any Ukrainian foundations or organizations you trust. All right, with that out of the way, let me get to some of the other stuff here. Dee will probably be joining us later. Alex is out with the sickness today. That's it out of the way. Yeah, so Cappy, nice to have you on finally. We've been playing this for a few months now. Finally got one of the people I've been trying to grab onto the come on the show here. People have been very busy recently. So with all the intros out of the way, talk a bit about yourself and why you wanted to come on the show.
Hey, great to be here. Thank you for having me on.
Mm-hmm.
So I run a Substack, alwaysthehorizon.substack.com. Cappy is generally short for Copernican, and that's what I go by over on Substack. And I wanted to be here mostly because I'm interested in a lot of these topics. I'm not as well educated in the global geopolitical landscape as the host here, but
Thank you.
I'm not, but I really appreciate your skill in delivering some of the information about what's going on in the world. mostly I've sort of checked into the background. I like looking at epistemics, which is the study of how it is that we know that things are true. I do book reviews and philosophical discussions, and I also cover like mostly American and Western politics. It's There's a whole lot going on, and it's been a really busy couple of weeks these last couple of weeks. So I was excited to get the opportunity to hop on here and have a conversation.
Sure. Let me give you guys his Substack here. I'll post it in Rumble and Odyssey. Let me just put that out there real quick. This is a one-man show after all, so I have to write all this out and do it myself. So here we go. All right, guys. Yeah. So we got a lot to talk about, and for people that usually listen to us for our Ukraine updates, let me just get a couple things out of the way. There has been some positive developments in Pokrovsk. It was reported that Ukraine is actually gaining close to 200 square kilometers back in the Pokrovsk direction, so the main Russian thrust is failing. There's a suspected fall offensive by the Russians being gathered. They have a strategic reserve they're going to commit eventually. We'll see how that materializes. The only real bad news as far as the front movement goes is that Kupiansk has been penetrated by the Russians in the Luhansk sector by the Oskil River. We'll see how that develops also. But for the most part, the front is more or less in a I hate to say stalemate fashion because it's very fluid still, but you guys get what I'm saying. The movement is very minimal from the Russian side, and positive for the Ukrainians in some key sectors. Geopolitically, Zelensky is meeting Trump in New York this week at a UN General Assembly meeting. We'll follow that up next week with how that meeting goes. All right, with that out of the way, Charlie Kirk. Let me. We talked about this on the show, kind of a different format. It was much more commentary and for some thinking in the future there. They've had a few different memorials for him. They had one this morning with him at was it the not the mic try to think it was the stadium in Arizona there. Sorry, I apologize, guys. But yeah, it was attended by Trump, most of his staff. Some key people that showed up for Trump was Elon Musk. It sounds like they're playing footsie again, trying to kiss and make up, along with Dana White, who is an interesting figure because he plays as an intermediary between America, the Middle East, and Russia in a weird way. There's been several articles, also a very good one on Radical Dose, that kind of documents this pretty well. I was going to write a paper on that, would have been a 3 or 4 parter, but I just didn't have the time for it. Succinctly put, he plays as a sports intermediary slash diplomat between the West and Russia and the Middle East because a lot of the better fighters are from Chechnya, Chechnya being under Kadyrov, Kadyrov being connected to Putin. Putin's kind of the intermediary between that part of the global south and Russia, and the way the Chechen fighters are farmed out to the UFC, they have an opportunity to go to the West and America to do some diplomatic foreign relations stuff through the sports world. And Trump still talking to Dana White that closely is fairly interesting in my mind, but that's a whole different point. But as far as the memorial goes, the messaging I thought was really interesting. They talked a lot about the gospel and a lot of the concerns of Christians in America, and not a whole lot of the rhetoric we would like to see, to put it bluntly. It was much more about apologetics and reconciliation, and I was just watching a thing on TPUSA before we started the show. They're talking about restoring order and having a dialogue again and all this stuff. I'm just rubbing my eyes, just thinking, what the fuck is wrong with conservatives? Of course, this was coming from a guy from a fairly swarthy, olive-skinned phenotype. So anyway, their interests are still fairly secure, I would say, and I'm disappointed to say the least in what has been publicly said at these events. But the grassroots, it does seem, has had a watershed moment, to say the least. We're seeing a lot of good outreach from a lot of nationalist groups at a lot of these memorials. NorCal Active Club did a good thing. We've seen the Nationalist Network out of Southern California near Huntington Beach make some good headway. Patriot Front's done a couple. So just the ones we've seen publicly. This is not even the stuff that's been unofficial and not put out for us to consume. So, anyways,
I
yeah. So
think
go ahead.
I would propose that the unofficial outreach has actually been more effective.
Mhm.
So I view the memorial itself as being, and we all know that it's an enormous optics campaign.
It is.
But the what's effectively happened is many of the moderate sort of boomercon Republicans, many of the powers that be, are in a position where they have justification to take their foot off the brakes, while the mid-level, much more aggressive conservative right takes advantage of the cultural mandate they've been granted by this series of by first the murder and then the assassination.
Hmm.
Um, so I think that optically the boomer right is trying to position itself as being a potentially moderating influence, but also making it relatively clear that they're not going to be pumping the brakes anymore to try and slow down the hard right, so to speak. Because in response to this, like Twitter's been on fire
It has.
for the last couple of days, and there's no need for Donald Trump or Erica Kirk to get up there and start going off about left-wing demons or something. When you've got thousands and thousands of mid-level right-wing influencers doing it for them,
Hmm.
left and right. There's the amount of anger at the mid-level is extremely high because partially they know that they're the targets. They're the ones that are going to be targeted by the left as a consequence of this, and they're doing an excellent job of successfully delivering the message to the general population that the left hates them, like all of them, like 80 million, 100 million voting Americans, and wants them all dead, by the left's own admission in response to the assassination, in response to the horrific, murderous assassination of the peaceful and innocent Charlie Kirk. Um, they use loaded language. We can do
Hmm.
it. So,
Hmm.
um, I think that in terms of like long term, medium term, the next year or two, it depends on how much control of the bureaucratic enforcement apparatus the administration can seize as a consequence of this cultural mandate they've been granted, while they stop pumping the brakes on the hard right influencers riling people up. And so you've seen Turning Point USA chapters just popping up across the country.
Hmm.
You've seen a bunch of, I would love to look into the statistics of this, but I don't have it off the
But
top of
yeah,
my
we don't have the
head.
data yet. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, we don't have the data yet, but I really want to see what the sale of Christian iconography has been over the last that'll be coming out like at the end of this month. I want to see how much of a spike there has been in a sale of like Christian iconography just off Amazon and whatnot. I don't know where I'd look for that data even, but my money is that there's been a huge spike in it, which is a bunch of women in their 20s and 30s, who no longer want to be associated with the progressive movement, even if they were in the past. So I anticipate that there's going to be a lot of symbolism used to show a cultural bias in especially the Christian conservative direction that will last for years after this, for like a whole generation is going to
Hmm.
remember this.
Yeah, and that's been a concern of mine is because the way the rhetoric has been coming out, it's been much more about the Gospels and the term of forgiveness and turning the other cheek and all this stuff, right? So what we are mentioning there is the grassroots reaction to the killing of Kirk and this groundswell that they're getting, and this people like Milo and some of the other people I saw at the Scottsdale Memorial. Sorry, I'm trying to remember the name of the stadium
Mhm.
still in my head. Um, I only caught like the first half of it. I didn't catch the important people at the back half because I had stuff to do. But they had some of these people that were Charlie Kirk's benefactors. One of them was one of these old blue bloods, and
Mhm.
she was saying, well, the first time I talked to Charlie, I gave him a challenge grant, and if he had $25,000 in was it a week or something like that, I'll back up half the other money with my money, blah blah blah. It's like he did in
Mhm.
2 days, and then I knew we had a real hard charger. This whole thing is like, oh, so you're talking just because you gave him money? Cool, you know. that's and then with what I saw just recently, I was talking about the Jewish guy there. Leadership, I think, is not in alignment with what the groundswell is. Their sentiments. So we're going to have another problem of a challenge of leadership within the right. We talked about this last show where people like Elon Musk weren't actually giving out grant money to people that we know that would be the artists for those murals for Arena. We're seeing that the status quo wants to be maintained at the upper level of society, but I don't think they know how to negotiate that right now. The left has lost complete control over their base, and they're consequently probably going to have greater challenges in the midterms and the next presidential election, I presume. But right now, with what the right-wing leadership is doing in America, they're trying to massage the rhetoric to where it stabilizes the country because any people that are in power, their primary interest is stability. They know that this is going to have, like you said, a groundswell change in people's sentiment, outlook, and how they network between everyone else around them. And that is something that's a danger for them because if a divided country, they can't safely invest their own future into a country that has political divisions. But at the same time, they want to also have the legitimacy at the same time. It's a weird center line they're trying to walk. Like they want the sympathy of that new public coming into their fold, so to speak, but they also want to maintain their power through the money and mechanisms, the institutions that they have, because the right is it's much more rigid than the left in its organization. It's taken a while to build it up over the decades, but it is there. But at the same time, it's not as well established as the left's. And I feel that the as fragile as these conservative institutions, if you can call them that, are, I don't think they really can handle what's coming. What is coming, I like Cap, we will talk about later, is a form of Christian nationalism. I'm still of the opinion that the right wing youth in this country, especially amongst the white kids in this country, they want their country back, or they actually want something that they never had before, which is a nation of their own. And that's a revolutionary zeal to it. To have something never happened, and it kind of harkens back to the sentiment and again rhetoric that the left had in America in the 1960s. They wanted something they never had, which was a quasi-socialist state, which they never achieved, but it was a welfare state. That was what they got. But at the same time, we're looking at demographics, and the demographics to switch back to something that they've never had before is going to require sacrifice. And Charlie Kirk doing what he suffered. Is going to be a catalyst for that, though, possibly. And at the same time, the right wing, I would say.
So my suspicion is that there's going to be a crisis in leadership, and that the right is going to. The crisis in leadership is probably going to happen after Donald Trump, because he's capable of holding everybody together. On willpower alone. That's just how he rolls, and he is to a degree out for blood against a lot of the mid-level bureaucrats. And so, what I suspect he's going to do is he's going to, over the next couple of years, try and he's already doing it, reorient the federal enforcement apparatus to go after the left in ways that the left has been using against the right. Only this time we're actually years trying, and he's already doing it.
Sorry, that was me. That was me.
Okay,
I'm doing engineering in the background. It's audio shit. Sorry, go ahead. I didn't mean to bring your plans out there.
But yeah, I anticipate that he's going to be in a position to use this groundswell and to let it continue growing, because there's absolutely no feasible way not to let it continue growing at this point. So the most beneficial path for him is to create an environment where the sentiment and rhetoric on the right can be funneled into institutional enforcement rather than vigilantism, because the general population is getting dangerously close to approving of generalized vigilantism against these left-wing and what I can now say are officially terrorist organizations.
Yeah, that's a whole different ball of wax. We're I feel like we're kind of dovetailing between some of the subjects we want to talk about here in some
A little
ways.
bit, yeah.
Yeah, let's put a bookmark in that right now because I do want to talk about you were asking about Venezuelan stuff because the way
I was curious.
no, because there is actually a connection there in the
Hmm.
legality of terrorist organizations, whether it's domestic or foreign. I can kind
Hmm.
of get onto the Antifa stuff a little bit more later, but um, that's a complicated thing, I guess, because there's a lot of legal concerns with that. I'm not a lawyer by any stretch of the imagination, but it comes down to civil liberties and the power of the state to enforce what you can call that. I would say counterinsurgent measures against
Yeah.
terrorist organizations. But that's a different thing. You use that on someone else's soil, not America, to put it succinctly. But anyway, so the memorial, it's like you're saying, it's an institutional form of control, and
Hmm.
it's misaligned with what's happening on the grassroots level. Um, at the same time, I'm going to go on a small side path here. The messaging from the usual suspects has been interesting to note. The typical Russian, I hate to say Russian bots, but the 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 confirmed Russian assets is what I'll say, like Tim Pool, for example. They're taking this opportunity to inflame sentiments and just straight out lie about what has been digested by the general public. Uh, Kirk's wife's rhetoric is very public. Everyone's very aware of what she said, but he's saying that conservatives say no mercy to liberals over Charlie Kirk's assassination. I thought this was just a flagrant lie and just more bullshit, but this is what she actually said at the memorial.
My husband, Charlie, he wanted to save young men just like the one who took his life.
The State Farm Stadium. Okay. All right.
Hmm.
That young man. On the cross, our Savior said, Father, forgive them, for they not know what they do. That man, that young man.
I'm sorry. The if you look at her eyes, it pains her to say these things. Honestly feel in her heart of hearts she still wants blood from this guy.
Oh, she definitely does.
This is again that institutional rhetorical control, though. She was coerced in some way to say this, possibly.
I forgive him.
No, you not anyway. I'm not convinced. I'm not convinced.
I'm not convinced either.
Uh, you see any satisfaction in these guys' faces here? None.
Nope.
So you just tell by the lips and the eyes and the brows. It's all like, what the fuck? The women love it, though. Women love it, though.
Oh yeah, they love it. But I don't think that the hard right is going to be satisfied by this at all, and they know it. They know the hard right won't.
Yeah. No, this will not be digested well by, I think, many conservatives, even though, just because it's not what people want anymore. They don't
And it
want.
doesn't work. It doesn't work. Like it's
Hmm.
been well established that sort of behavior doesn't work.
Yeah. Fuck, dude. It just smacks to me how little control they actually have, and I think this is a perspective problem the right has. Um, I kind of want to get into, well, okay, so we're gonna talk a bit more about the forgiveness thing here. Um,
Oh man, I'm ready to get into the philosophy of Christianity on this one.
yeah,
I think that
let me hand it off to you then. Give me some
okay.
your perspective on the.
Okay, I'll get into the philosophy of
Mhm.
Christianity on this one. Um, there's a great meme going around on Twitter where it's a picture of an executioner's sword from the medieval period. which has the inscription on it, something along the lines of, I'm going to paraphrase, I raised this blade in the hopes that the sinner's soul might be redeemed. Um, so you can hope that somebody can be redeemed, but you can also, take their head off with a sword and be completely justified in doing so. Um, I think that modern evangelicalism itself is the main origin of this bizarre interpretation of Christianity that the expectation is that for the laws and the forces of man to be equivalent to the laws and forces of God. Um, and uh, the common retort that I've heard in some circles is God may forgive him, but I won't. I'm not God. I'm
Yeah.
not a better
Yeah.
person than that.
Yeah.
And I know God will forgive me for not being that good of a person.
Hmm.
Um, I think that evangelicalism is the sort of the origin point for this really bizarre interpretation of morality. And in many ways, evangelicalism does not hold nearly the same cultural power that it did back in the 80s when a lot of these boomer con institutions were created. So I suspect evangelicalism is on the way out, one way or another. Um, Eastern Orthodox does not have the same predilections. It's pretty popular. Catholicism is getting more popular. It has some of these predilections, but not nearly as strongly. And then you got people like Baptists and whatnot, Lutherans that are completely comfortable with having to go to war in order to protect Christendom. And you can hope for the redemption of other people. You can pray for the redemption of other people. There's no rules against that. In fact, it's heavily encouraged. But there are no rules that say that in doing so you have to always turn the other cheek in the face of evil. Like that is specifically warned against in a lot of biblical interpretations.
Hmm.
So that's my
Okay.
opinion of it, and I think that's the
Yeah.
opinion of most other people who
Hmm.
are young Christians at this point.
Right, and I mean, me and Derry D, we went to war because mainly of the lies we were fed in our younger days about WMDs because of these evangelicals. So we
Hmm.
personally, I have a bit of a beef with them, and with what we're seeing though, their power is declining. The neoconservative side of the conservative movement is dying. The evangelical base, which is fundamental for a lot of this at a grassroots level, is dying too. They're not having people go to their churches. There's been a lot of reports of Eastern Orthodoxy, traditional Catholicism, sorry, having more kids go into their pews and their churches weekly now. Turning Point again says that a lot of kids showed up in T-shirts, and I was happy to see these kids in T-shirts this last week because of Charlie Kirk. So we're seeing what might be a groundswell of a 2016 milieu again with a lot of young kids though. Um, so we're going to see new pipelines develop because we saw a lot of people come from an engineering background, a libertarian background, a soft conservative background, a Christian background in that era 10 years ago. We're seeing a new crop of kids coming in, and we need to harvest this new body of people for a better future. So it means going into these spaces again, guys. A lot of us have old networks and old people in these institutions, whether it's churches or political clubs. Go back in
Hmm.
there and start pulling out the ones that are good. And this time, don't fuck around and grabbing everyone. All right, don't bring in the guy who's in charge of the Stormer Brook Club. I forgot his fucking name. God, I forgot his name. Anyway, Alex would know this better. He knows names better than I do. But don't grab everyone. Leave the bad ones out, and let's keep the good ones this time. All right, because with what we saw last time with the NJP and Stormer, we had a lot of bad leadership, and that shot that kneecapped us, especially in Charlottesville and the 2018 era. So let's do it right this time. Let's get some good kids that are actually worth putting time in. Yeah. Anyway, I think that kind of gets done with that bit there. But let's talk a little bit about the conspiracy on
Oh
Israel.
yeah, that one. I
Yeah.
love hearing about this. Go on.
Yeah. Okay. So I'll break it down to two camps here. A good friend of mine, he's been on the show once, I think, but he is convinced that Mossad is the agency responsible for this. Um, succinctly put, it is that George Zinn was at the Boston bombing, 9/11, and Charlie Kirk's killing, and that's the links because he's Jewish, I guess. I don't know. So I haven't seen documentation on like how he was at all these events, or if there's anything to even link Mossad to this, though. We have a how to put it. We have a person we both know that has said, well, it's either the Mossad link or it's the Antifa link, which is Jewish, right? We all know the background of Antifa. I'm like, okay, that's fine. I'm not going to push back on that. But at the same time, like, the, the problem with this part of a idea of this whole thing is that it's largely just a narrative. There are little to no facts to link this Robinson kid to a Mossad handler, cell, whatever you want to call it. He was a mixed up kid in his early 20s living in Utah that was getting, buggered by a tranny. Um, we have to account that random things do fucking happen. And a kid that has an open asshole because he, you know, came from a conservative family in Utah, maybe he was just reacting against his parents and he fell in love with some, air quotes there, with a sexual pervert and just decided to go off the hinge and just go shoot somebody. These things do happen. And the gun he had was an old hunting rifle from his grandfather, I guess. Supposedly it didn't even have a
Well,
registry
that's at
number on
least
it.
what the released text messages say, but they
Right,
are
right.
questionable.
Everything's questionable, obviously, but at the same time, I'm going off the best facts I can get. So this kind of gets into the other side of it, though. I'm in the camp where I believe that this was a purely ideologically or slash political motivated killing. The brass casings are case in point on that. The Ciao Bella thing is a if Dirty Diva comes on, he could get much more into this though. It's a reference to old Italian communism in some way. I he knows he's much more read on that part than I am, but so there's a lot of little bit in the whole catch this fascist on the bolt casing was another big thing, right? So with the data we do have, I'm inclined to say, well, this is just purely a single motivated killer. I thought at first it might have been a group of people because he got away successfully for about 48 hours. And Cash Patel, in his incompetency, just said, oh, we got him. No, we don't. Oh, we got him again. No, we don't. Right? It was George Zinn. They released him. They thought they got somebody else that wasn't they actually the guy, but then they found him in Zion National Park, I guess. So the problem I want to kind of highlight here is that people are emotionally invested in narratives. We all are. I'm guilty of that too. But at the same time, I want to pull myself objectively out of that hole, especially with something like this. Falls into what could easily be categorized as a conspiracy to kill a white man in America. Questioning Israel and all the other videos he was doing 2 weeks to a month prior to his assassination. Um, Needless to say, it takes a lot of time and resources to do a political killing or an assassination plot or the pager bombings we saw in Lebanon that took decades for Mossad to set up, which was executed very successfully against Hezbollah. At the same time, to set up an assassination like that with a deranged motherfucker in Utah, of all places, I don't even think it's really evangelical. In my understanding, it's mainly from the South and parts of the Midwest. Um, he isn't the sort of guy. He doesn't fit the profile for someone to be aligned with Mossad in any case.
So,
Go ahead.
all right. So there's a few different things that one could break down from
Sure.
this. The first one is I'm gonna cite Luigi Mangione on this one. The first one is that the federal government cannot afford to not catch somebody. Um, so if the federal government doesn't catch the perpetrator of this, it sets a precedent. So they have to catch the perpetrator regardless.
Mm-hmm.
Um, the second thing that I would state is that I am almost guarantee you that Palantir, like the full mass data collection of Palantir, was activated for this. Um, Now, with that said, based on the information that's been officially released, it seems like Palantir was not directly useful in catching the dude. Rather, the dude's father turned him in, if we believe the official narrative.
Mm-hmm.
And I believe that part of the official narrative because that has too many people involved in it for it to not be accurate,
Right.
in my opinion. There's just too many randos involved in that one. So I do believe that the dude's father turned him in. Um, what this means, though, is that we could be looking at an environment where somebody's either set up as a fall guy or an environment where the federal government is forced into action, whether they have 100% surety or not, just to assuage the public. And this will be, I mean, he's going to be found guilty in court. It's going to be very hard not to convict him. But
Yeah.
um,
Yeah. Yeah.
but if there's anything else going on, effectively, anything else going on has to have set this dude up as a fall guy, as far as like conspiracies go. Which means that you're probably looking at pretty large actors. If it's more than just a single independent actor, I suspect it probably is a semi-single independent actor. There's probably a couple Discord servers he's on that are particularly far left and
Mm-hmm.
spicy.
Mm-hmm.
But I suspect also that there wasn't a huge amount of effort put into arranging this for him, just trying to radicalize this dude into doing something crazy. Can you still hear me? I got a weird notification.
No, yeah, you're fine. You're fine.
Okay. Um, so if it was a state operation, the options are that it was a significant state operation. So then we're looking at Mossad or a part of the U.S. government, or maybe the Russians or Chinese, like if you really want to go there.
Mm-hmm.
But it would be a sufficiently large, sufficiently focused operation to set up a fall guy in the United States that is already appropriate for the type of political strife that this assassination could create. Now, I could see China or Russia attempting this. Mossad has far too much to lose if they're caught, either
Mm-hmm.
officially in the narrative or unofficially with our agencies figuring out what they did,
Mm-hmm.
because our agencies would not take that well. Um,
Right, and,
it's a huge
and that's
amount of
actually
egg on their face.
no, that's actually an excellent mature point. It's like, well, what if they got caught? How much tension and public backlash would that be?
Hmm.
Right, killing Charlie Kirk is way too risky for Mossad to piss off all the Christians in America. Right?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Um,
the math doesn't work. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so the mathematics on Mossad doing it, what would they have to gain? They get him Charlie Kirk to be quiet,
Hmm.
but they do also risk if they get caught, every Christian in the United States, which is a lot of them,
Hmm.
effectively wanting to completely sever ties with Israel. And if they don't get caught, they risk the United States, which is the only country that's keeping them existing in the Middle East,
Yeah, yeah,
descending into civil conflict.
yeah, and
Um,
go ahead, go ahead.
either way, it's a terrible risk reward analysis. There's nothing Charlie Kirk could say that would be worth the risks of assassinating him.
Right, and just
Um,
go ahead, go ahead.
no, you go ahead.
Yeah, the risk benefit is something I often go back to on a lot of rationalism and these decision making points. It wasn't until again going back to the pager bombing thing, it wasn't until Israeli intelligence found out that their bombings in southern Lebanon weren't really that effective at taking out the launchers that Hezbollah had that they decided to activate that pager bomb plot, which again was very successful, injuring or killing several thousand leadership in Hezbollah. Um, and that was the cost benefit of like, well, we have this asset. Do we use it now or never? And they decided to activate it because they understood that their bombing campaign would take too long. Public sentiment would turn against them, and they decided to expedite that intel operation, and they had good results with it. That's just the objective truth. And the
Yeah,
same,
don't
it,
use don't be the only politically actionable organization that uses a given specific piece of technology.
right, yeah. But going to the Charlie Kirk example, it's like because he was simply saying some things about Israel, we've had people like Alex Jones say way worse about that 20 years ago, and a lot of other people that are equal to or greater than Charlie Kirk in outreach, at least in a public profile sense. I mean, Tucker Carlson, for example, why was he not whacked? He said some very interesting things about Israel a few times, but he's still around. He has a very large independent base now. He's detached from the Fox establishment, and he's been very successful with that. But Charlie Kirk is reaching the youth in a very direct way that isn't, how to put it, he's very media savvy, but it's a very time intense and resource intense approach to go to every college and just debate people very publicly. Not to mention very risky, or was. And if that was his means of communication with people to convince people of his point, it wasn't the best. He was very dedicated to his approach and his methods because that was what he was dedicated to doing. He had an approach to debate people in the marketplace of ideas and was killed for it. That's why that point on him being that man reaching across the aisle is so true, I think. Public discourse in this country is very well and dead, and because of that, we're going to escalate to a violent point where there is no reciprocity even vocally anymore. And I feel that with what we were mentioning earlier, it's just the whole stability thing I think needs to be again underlined. The state understands how little control they have over present circumstances, though. No one accounted for Charlie Kirk being killed. And if Trump was killed in Pittsburgh, there were controls in place for the state to continue operating. But with this groundswell of young, activated white youth, they don't know what to do. That is the vector of a lot of politics they don't want to have touched. That's why rhetorically they're trying to spin it as a Christian thing. The forgiveness thing, like we saw with his wife. Anyway, I just
Yeah, no,
I'm
we're
frustrated.
not doing that.
Yeah, I'm just again, it's always been a leadership problem with the right. There's very few people willing to risk their own, even putting an ounce of skin in the game. And it would just be money at this point. It wouldn't even have to be them on a stage again, speaking publicly, putting themselves at physical risk. They're so obsessed, and again, I'm going off another tangent here. They're so obsessed with private property and their own personal wealth that they're not willing to commit to actual social change. And that's kind of another thing of what we're talking about with the forgiveness, everything else. Like, you want to affect things socially as a conservative, you need to be unapologetic, what's the right term, intolerant, and just have that sort of furor in your heart and your
Yeah,
belly to change
nowhere in the
things.
Bible does it say that it's your moral duty to tolerate evil.
Yeah, and we actually had an interesting conversation in our public chat. We had a young lady, and I'm not taking away from her. I think she actually jumped out of her chat after people jumped on her about it. But she was saying it was the Christian thing to do for his wife to forgive her husband's killer, right? And we have a male-dominated chat that just kind of, chafes us a little bit in our male sensibilities, I believe. But I just thought, I put it out there. It's like forgiveness to evil is betrayal to the good, or mercy to the mercy to evil is betrayal to the good, and that, like you're saying, it's not the Christian thing to do to forgive people that threaten to kill you repeatedly. Turning the other cheek doesn't always work, and like what she was saying there, Alex in our chat was giving a good point. He wasn't saying that to the goodness, I'm forgetting the Pharisees. Sorry, he wasn't saying that about the Jews, the Pharisees. He was saying that about the Roman soldiers that were doing the operation to put him on the cross. Those are
Hmm.
the people that are being ignorant. Those are the people that aren't with evil in their heart. Like, they don't know what they're doing. They're just ignorant pagans, whatever you want to call it, right? The Pharisees, however, were very much filled with malice and evil in their heart to kill the Son of God, right? So when you have someone with intent, and we know the intent and the outcome of that intent, to simply turn the other cheek is to be compliant with that evil. Like, I'm not saying he got away with it, but you forgiving him for killing your husband, sorry, the father of your children, that is evil. Like, it has to be called out for what it is. And I don't want to speak. I'm not speaking ill of the dead or her. Uh, sorry, I'm getting all wrapped up here. I'm not trying to speak bad of his wife at all, really, but like the rhetoric that she had to say there, like we just showed, it's compliant with the evil that we all live under.
Yeah,
And
and we're sick of it. And I
yes,
think I
everyone
think
is.
this is why even like the right wing leadership is they're not trying very hard to pump the brakes on this. And then you've got the influencers and the 50,000 to 500,000 subscriber range on like YouTubers,
Hmm.
the conservative influencers, they really are calling for blood. Every time somebody says, no, 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 we should turn down the temperature, and they're like, you shot the guy who tried that.
Yeah. So it's not the time for compromise. It's not the time for surrendering another incident in American history. Like this is a historical moment. And the left didn't forgive when MLK was killed. They didn't stop protesting when Rosa Parks was, moved off the seat on the bus. They were uncompromising, they were unforgiving, and they won. We have the opportunity to win because if we just show up like we have seen in the previous battle eras, we typically win, even in Berkeley, which is the heart of leftydom, if you want to call it that, on the West Coast for the most
Hmm.
part. Um,
Hmm.
that space was taken. That public domain was ours for a while, at least, which I think was a huge optics win, not to mention an absolute unprecedented physical space win. But at the same time, again, it requires putting skin in the game and risk and all these other things. But I keep repeating myself here. I apologize, but it just comes down to that one lever that needs to be flipped. There has to be someone in leadership willing to take that risk, and the only person that's done that in recent years has been Richard Spencer. Um, some people have emotional things about him. I get that, but at the same time, he was the only person of any wealth or background that was willing to take a risk with his personal wealth, his physical safety, and his own family standing to step into our politics. He stepped out for probably good reason, but at the same time, he tried. You don't see that happening with Elon Musk. He was the richest man in the world and would probably, get away with it again. I mean, he was running with MAGA, selling electric cars to liberals. Obviously that's a conflict of interest. Like, well, you want to sell green energy vehicles to people that hate you, but you're still getting away with it. It's he's able to walk that line because he has so much fucking money, but he just chooses not to. So I don't know. I don't know what's going to take to really get leadership on board with us at this point. It has to come down to some point where, again, private property and capital come at risk from the left or somebody to where they say, oh, we need to protect our interest, which is their wealth and capital, from whoever that party might be. Let's invest in these people that want to promote the state and that control of the state. They'll probably be more forgiving on our social things if we allow the protection of private property. Now, this kind of gets into, we're kind of going off some different things here because we want to talk about Christian nationalism, which we will soon. But like going forward into the future again with this whole incident, the assassination, what's kind of germinating in the background. What does the future look like now after Charlie Kirk's killing? We have a body of people moving in, like we talked about. Leadership that's very not knowing what to do with all this. But we know their interests, we know their intent. But how do we change that though? And with the way the left is continually radicalizing itself and getting only more deranged, um, that gives us opportunities to also react in a righteous way and have the moral validity to react in a good way. Um, and that's typically how the American psyche works. Like they don't like they don't like the first mover in violence. If you react to that violence, then you're in the right because you're defending yourself. That's why the left always um, rhetorically spins their any action they do as self-defense or community self-defense, right?
And that's something that we should be doing too. Like anytime
Absolutely. Yeah.
a leftist threatens you or says something retarded or aggressive to you, say, no, 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 I'm merely defending my peaceful, wholesome community of families from your vicious hate. And just be consistent about it. Have consistent messaging. That's what they do. Load your language up as much as you can if you're on like social media or something,
Hmm.
because there's no reason not to. And instead of demanding blood for what they did to Charlie Kirk, the one guy who was really trying dialogue with them, um, say no, 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 we need to defend our peaceful orators against your violence and hate, and we will do so very aggressively as
Hmm.
needed. It's the same stupid rhetorical tactics they use because apparently they work.
Hmm. Yeah, and I feel that's a good step for us rhetorically at a grassroots level that which we can own also. At this point, like we need to be inventing our own playbooks again and also readjusting our rules of engagement. and there's a spectrum to that. And as I always talk about, that's something I got from, anyone that's been in the military understands what a force continuum is. First is just presence. I think we have that all pretty good lockdown because a lot of our guys work out. We dress well. We're in uniform for whatever it might be. And it kind of goes up to rhetoric, soft controls, then hard controls, then the other measure I won't mention. But we get where it goes. Um, the spectrum of that has to be practiced and learned, and it has to be at least in some way, how to put it, understood between all parties involved in the nationalist right wing, even the Christian right wing, I'd say. Because at this point, like, we have to understand that any public presence we have in the public, any presence we have in the public square will most likely be met with physical resistance, and then it does escalate with how the left does that asymmetrically. I'll give you an example. At Berkeley, it was a sanctioned protest and stuff like that. Their way of trying to get people out of that public space was to try to maneuver around the security detail. So it's a square block. I wish I could bring it up on my map here, but I won't. They tried moving their little vanguard around and trying to find gaps, because they were the offensive force against a defensive position that was trying to have a public rally. It was a free speech rally. And eventually it turned down into the Charge of Berkeley, which was great done. It was great video footage from that day. But prior to that, there was this whole thing called the Battle of the Dumpster. Like, both sides were pushing a dumpster against each other, and it just kind of devolved into at that point, a weird shoving match between a garbage receptacle. This is back when Base Spartan was around, Base Stickman was still around.
The knight.
The Knights, yeah.
Yeah.
He'd end up being like a fucking like cuckold dude, I guess. He was just a weird dude. But yeah, we have to be better than that. So we have had guys in boxing, jiu-jitsu, a lot of other forms of military and martial arts training.
As a heads up, just be really careful with jiu-jitsu if there's
Yeah.
more than one attacker, and there always are in black bloc.
Yeah,
Like
absolutely.
boxing, kickboxing, melee weapons. If anybody wants to study like European martial arts for melee weapons, that's the direction you need to go.
Hmm. Yeah, and like let's start figuring this out, guys. I don't know what venue would be available for people to like standardize this on a national level because we have such a huge country, but I think the ROE is going to have to be very circumstantial to your locality. If you're in Seattle, you're going to have to deal with the Emerald City Antifa. If you're in Portland, Rose City Antifa. Down in Sacramento, they had their history with the Golden State Skinheads, and at that time, the Traditionalist Workers' Party in the Capitol. That's a whole different ROE down there.
Again, keep
Go
in
ahead.
mind though, we have reached the political stage where the federal government, in order to avoid vigilantism, is working to declare and prosecute a whole lot of these organizations as actual terrorist organizations. Now, I understand there's FTOs, the foreign terrorist organizations, for which the rules of engagement are different, but because Antifa is international, I suspect that's the direction that the administration is going to go, is declare it an international terrorist organization with a domestic cells. So as long as the potential exists for severe vigilantism inside the United States, the federal government will be forced into direct action confronting these terrorist cells. So you don't have to get into direct combat with them, but you do have to ensure that the federal government is aware that there are groups and individuals in the country willing to, thereby forcing their hand to act to prevent vigilantism.
Yeah. But that's going to be typically by the left, unfortunately, at this point. I think right now, with the heat and division in this country, if you're going out to train in whatever capacity that might be, and you see a collective of people that we could spot them a mile away at this point. If you see a collective of
Yeah.
people that are training in the woods or in a park or something like that, and they look like they would be wearing tranny flags or LGBT flags, whatever, or even social democrats at this point, document them, get pictures, license plates, whatever. That's all public information. You don't need to put it out, but just document it and pass it on to like Antifa Watch or something like that, right? There are
Or I mean, like FBI offices too. You want public
sure.
public dissemination of this information, but you also want to ensure that the federal agencies have access to it.
True, but like we have these receptacles of information that are able to digest this information and put out publicly. They'll have a database of information that can be passed along, and these people will disseminate later at the appropriate time, I believe. So, talking to federal authorities, I think this is my own personal opinion, is a little too soon for that. When things escalate to where there's a point of violence, those receptacles that have this information, we could get in contact with them again, say, hey, this is happening in my local area. I gave you this information. Maybe it's time to release this information publicly and talk to the authorities. That
Well,
way,
being able to cite, being able to, in a later court case, for instance, cite that this information was provided to the federal government, and because of a lack of action on their part, we were forced to defend our community. It will be extremely beneficial, if you end up in a court case situation. So having a documentation of providing the information to federal sources is actually going to be it's going to land, it's going to help the court case land on your side if that's necessary.
I understand that, but the whole point is to avoid being in a court case. I think.
Well, yeah, obviously
Yeah,
that's
yeah, yeah.
the point, but it's
Yeah.
something to keep in mind
Sure.
is a year after the fact being able to cite, having provided this information, and then being placed in a position where you're forced to defend yourselves, um, is going to be beneficial for you in comparison to the alternative.
Well, it's also interesting that this dynamic is really dependent on who is the president at the time, because he's the executor
Yes.
of the law. If you have a Democrat, if Kamala got in office, right, we would be having a much more insurgent mindset about this versus a counterinsurgent mindset because we have an ostensibly right-wing guy in office. Um, yeah, it really, elections do count, guys. If Kamala was in office, we'd probably be seeing a absolute crackdown on any sort of right-wing dissidents. Just mostly mainstream. I think a lot of our networks have gotten pretty good at being quiet and networking quietly at the same time. That does bring me to one interesting point. I've talked to a handful of people because everyone's trying to reach out to each other again, about all current events and trying to find other networks to get into right now, right? And even, that's what I was saying, go to the memorials, and a lot of people are like, oh, that's a good idea. But like at the same time, like the deeper cells that have been in this thing for close to a decade in some cases, the time to have networked with people was fucking last month. Like before any of this shit happens, that's the time to go and like talk to a recruiter or some sort of public outlet where they can digest your information, give you a little bit of a grace period before you're brought in, and then trained up and trusted eventually. Right now is not the time. Like this is the time that authorities are going to be looking into things, and groups that are established and have a trust circle around them aren't going to be bringing people in. It might sound counterintuitive because it's an opportunity. You have all these people out there, right? No, they're going to go out there and talk to these people on their own time. They're not going to really have the loner walk up to them and say, "Oh, hey, I'm looking for an active club. Can I join?" They're going to give you the fucking stink eye and say, "Who the fuck are you? Who the fuck is this guy?" Like where were you when we were out hiking? Where were you out when we were doing jujitsu in the park? A lot of these people post their shit on Telegram. It's just like, well, we put out the media presence, but now you want to join it after someone gets killed. It's like, I don't know. There's a suspicion there to begin with, but then it's like, well, is your motivation only when something happens, or is there a dedication behind that too? You know, um, it's an interesting psychological benchmark, I think, for a lot of people. The people that come in without that sort of public spark are the ones that have a vested interest in trying to change things, I think. People that have a vested interest when something is sparked off, in my experience, half of them at least do tend to fall off in some capacity. They'll build networks, they'll have their worldview change, they will emotionally invest in our messaging, but at the same time, they'll fall back into their old habits typically, for whatever it might be. I'm speaking in very general terms here, but that's an interesting bit I've seen in the last 2 weeks too. Is actually kind of gets us into our next bit here. These interactions we've had with conservatives on this issue. Um, People we know on this show talk to conservatives and the PNW. They're all very animated about this, and they're wanting to change things. They want to feel safe again. They want to be in a country that they can call their own. And there's an opportunity again for us to kind of change and mold the public rhetoric, but at the same time, the issue is that I don't feel that people want to put any skin in the game still. At least in a handful of incidents I've had with conversations with people, they just want to go back to grilling, as the old boomer meme is. But they understand that things have to change, and the youth again has so much tread on the wheels to change things because they can still take risks at a young age. People that are mid-age or elderly don't really feel that the risk is worth the reward. Um, but yeah, what
Well,
about your?
all right,
Go ahead.
so I'm
Yeah,
going to
so
delve
hand
into
off to
the
you.
economics of that a little
Go
bit.
ahead. Go ahead.
Yeah. So economically speaking, the youth often does not feel that the elder generation does not feel that the risk is worth the reward, depending on how stable that they are. And let's be honest, there's a shitload of millennials in their like mid 30s now that still don't have stable employment, still will never own a house, are still unmarried. I mean, I don't know if you've been following the demographic trends, but they're apocalyptically bad.
Mhm.
The birth rate in the United States over the last 4 years dropped from 1.8 to 1.6 for
Depends.
the
It
average
depends on which
female.
race you're breaking that down by too. Let me see if I can bring that up here. Sorry. Go. Continue. Continue.
Yeah. Uh, so recently it came down to 1.6, and I think that was a 23 or 24 number. Um, but what I would say is the fact that people haven't done anything and are already in their 30s does not mean they're not willing to, because there's a lot of people who are now older, more experienced, who still have nothing to lose. Um, and those people are going to end up forming sort of your wiser institutional backbone. Um, it costs you a few $100s, and it costs you a few $100s for a lawyer to set up a nonprofit. This is how the left does it, because once you have a nonprofit, then wealthy people who give you money get tax write-offs for doing it. So, if you got a few guys together and a few $100s, you need three people to be on the board. I think in some states, through 3 to 5. It depends on the state, if I remember correctly. Go set up a nonprofit, and then talk to your Turning Point chapter that just popped up in your town. They'll be interested to talk to you because you'll have shown that you've already done something and are already marginally competent. It takes several months to get your EIN number and whatnot back for getting a nonprofit. But set something like that up. You'll need a board. So you need like three people to be on the board. You can't pay yourself from the board, that kind of thing. There's rules. Talk to your lawyer when you hire a lawyer for $400 to help you set it up to make sure you're doing it the right way. But go set up a nonprofit, then talk to your Turning Point USA chapter, go to one of these events, one of these vigils, that kind of thing, hand out cards, and see if you can find a number of wealthy conservatives who don't want things to change, who will give you money for like the American Freedom and Liberty Association, or the American Historical Heritage Foundation, or whatever you want to name it. Just name it something vague with a vague mission statement so you can kind of do whatever you want with it, and go from there. Like, that's little things like that make up the backbone of how the progressive left uses political, economic, and institutional power to behave like these violent psychopaths and get away with it. And there's no reason that you can't start adopting some of those tools. They exist, they're easy to access, go do it. Sorry, go ahead. Hello?
I'm sorry, I muted myself
Uh,
there. Yeah, my bad.
oh, okay, go
Sorry
ahead.
about that. Yeah, so for decades we've understood the Hispanic birth rate to be very high, and traditionally it has been, but of all the racial breakdowns, this one is collapsing the worst. It's in a literal
Hmm.
fucking nosedive if you look at the graphs. I'm not going to break it up because we got to move on to other topics, but eventually we will probably see Hispanic birth rates actually plummet below white birth rates. And between all four categories, the whites and Asians are actually the most stable. Which I kind of correlate this to also to the IEQ spectrum. Whites and Asians being on the right side of that, the blacks and Hispanics being on the left side of that typically. And what this means to me though is that the white and Hispanic, well, I'm sorry, white and Asian demographics in America are much more likely to adopt a new abstraction of morality to to adapt and overcome the current dilemmas that we are all living under, right? Um, Traditionally, these are also the most well off financially, so they'll have the means and mental capability to adopt a new moral norm to have larger families. Whereas with the blacks and Hispanics, um, they won't. And when we see eventually the Hispanic birth rates fall below white birth rates in America, they will becoming a shrinking demographic in time to come. Not right now, but in time, it's very likely that the Hispanic birth rate will collapse below white replacement levels, which will probably rise up to 1.8 here in the next decade or two. And then they'll start deporting themselves back home, possibly, because it will still be a white country in name only, possibly. But culturally, though, it will be still in that trend. And amongst the Hispanics I talk to, a lot of them don't want to live in a Hispanic or Latinized America. Um, the ones I talk to are the functional ones, but there's still a large subset of Hispanics that are gangbangers, ghetto-minded people, but those align more closely with the blacks, right? And they have their own racial antipathy towards each other, and we've seen that manifest in LA and Atlanta, and parts of Texas. Where I'm going with this is that we're going to see over time a possible adaptation by whites and Asians to where they overcome the fertility demographic problem, where we will also see the blacks and Hispanics probably decline in total population over time too. Um, that's going to set up a whole different set of problems, economically speaking, because there will be a wealth income disparity. There'll be calls for racism again. These will be future conflict points, and possibly a reversal immigration, because what we're also seeing in Mexico is that their own domestic farming labor is aged close to 50 now. And a lot of the ones that move up here are the younger ones in the 30s and late 20s that have some skills because they can get more money here. The ones that stay in Mexico are the ones that want to be in Mexico, but they're also much older. So Mexico is going to have that labor come back to Mexico and help out their own economy. This is part of the trends we're going to be seeing develop over the next couple of decades. People are going to start they're going to have to nationalize some of these economies out of their own self-interest, whether it's soft power or hard power or embargoes or nationalizing certain sectors of the economy. Anyway, sorry, I kind of got off a tangent there again, but that's what this means in my mind. It's still very important though, I think, over the long term. So
Yeah, no, I think over the long term, this is something that I've been thinking about a fair bit, actually. I'm planning to write an article on this on my Substack soon. The demographic collapse is going to radically alter what we have historically thought of as racial politics in a lot of interesting ways. And I'm still chewing on exactly what my thoughts on the topic are. But I think that the sort of classic racial politics of the 20th century and those flashpoints are going to be replaced by something relatively different, and that'll be primarily due to the demographic collapse that we're witnessing.
Yeah. Yeah. I did get a link here from one of our better followers here from Lightning Patriot. He sent me an article on Twitter here. I would say this is probably very speculative, but we'll take a look at it because I do like rewarding our faithful viewers here, if you don't mind. So this is from Conflict Dispatch. It's an OSENT channel. Let me just open this up really quick and give you guys a little breakdown. OSENT geopolitics, NATO aligned, obviously EU, but yeah, not everyone can be perfect. But part of the connection is that this guy was possibly linked to the American Communist Party. So this is a hot take. So I'll give you my opinion after the end of this, though. But let's see what we can find here. So this is Jackson Hinckley, and that's Haz Al-Din, who is Red Haze, who's debated the Australian
Well, I agree fully with what part of this discussion is saying, which is that the Russians and Ukrainian botting accounts on Twitter definitely immediately started trying to make use of the tragedy for their own ends.
Right.
China and India have done it too. Speaking of India.
Yeah. I mean, God, you have was it Radio Genoa, a few others that are known Indian accounts, and at this point, I believe half the online DR is Pajit. There's just no way around it.
Hmm.
So, anyway, the the other conversation I had with the guy about the Mossad connection with Kirk's death is that um, because the conversation I had with a particular fellow, he was so emotionally invested in the idea of the narrative that when I presented, and I gave you an example with Tim Pool there, which is a new one. Um, the example I gave to him was that the idea that Ben Shapiro was going to take over TPUSA, and then Erica says, "No, I'm going to run the damn thing." He didn't even know that, right? So the information
Hmm.
that people get affects their perception, and that leads to actions and reactions that are desired by the people that put out this information warfare. Now, it's not easy for someone to say that, "Oh, I was duped or fooled by, memes, basically."
Yeah.
Whether it was true or not, I would probably guess that it was most likely true that Ben Shapiro wanted to take over TPUSA, but he didn't. Erica's going to run the damn thing, and when that information was presented, it was an emotional challenge for the person in question, and it came into an interesting point of conversation where we just had to agree to disagree.
I
Over
think
time,
I think getting involved in TPUSA is probably a good move at the
it
ground level
it
because
absolutely is.
you should you should move to push against the forgiveness narrative because like you can forgive the left forever and they're not going to stop behaving like they do because they don't give a shit about truth or
Right,
justice or any of these fake ideals. They're solely in it so that they can attain power and hurt people. Um,
but
and so
go ahead, finish
and
your point.
yeah, and so getting involved in TPUSA, like especially in anything approaching a leadership position, if you're associated with the university campus, it'll be quite popular. Um, but if you can get involved with that, it'd be a great position with which you can start pushing back against the common narrative on the subject.
Right. So again, like I always say, guys, with any information you get, always have in the back of your mind what is the desired outcome of this presenter giving me this information, right? You have to screen that because, I mean, at this point, there's so many different dimensions to warfare. We are the most susceptible to information because a lot of people are on social media all the time, and getting little seeds of information implanted into our minds affects our rationalization and our perception of the world and how we interact with it. With conflict dispatch, like we've shown, Hughes, a NATO and EU aligned person, tying in Russia with the American Communist Party and Kirk is going to shift the public perception, if he's successful in this attempted narrative, to align America more with Ukraine. That's a self-interested point, and I'm not against that, but at the same time, my principle is to the truth. Like I mentioned earlier, the three principles to any white nationalist should be truth, duty, loyalty. Right? Truth being the highest of that. If we're not true to ourselves and true to our Western roots, which is one of the biggest things that define us as white Westerners, we're no better than niggers because they love falling for conspiracy theories, lies, and what is emotionally rewarding and satisfying for themselves. Anyway, so
Um,
you,
I think that actually makes a pretty good segue to discuss the place of Christian nationalism from a philosophical position.
I want to get on that, but I want to reward and kind of dive into this just a little bit before we segue
Go
into the
for it.
next thing here. So, according to Conflict Dispatch, Tyler Robinson, who was the assassin of Charlie Kirk, allegedly connected to the Communist Party of America, or American Communist Party, has ties to the Russian state. Um, the founder being Jackson Hinckley, this is Dugan, and Has al-Din, who is Lebanese, if I remember right. And then you have Jackson Hinckley here with, I'm trying to remember, that's Has. That is Syria Girl right here. Don't know him. Don't know these other old people here. But yeah. And then RT obviously being sympathetic for them. Shortly after Kirk was shot by Tyler Robinson in Utah, Russian media outlets, officials, and ideologues began spreading disinformation online, which we've shown, initially blaming Ukraine or its supporters for the murder while inciting division and calls for violence in the United States. They tried putting this out as like an Azov operation too, if I remember seeing some of this. We'll read one of these here. Anti-Western propagandist and theorist Alexander Dugin from Russia shares a stream of polarizing content regarding the murder of Charlie Kirk, seeking to incite fear and violence. Yeah. So anyway, that Dugin being an interesting case for that, but Dmitry Medvedev is much more up the higher the chain of command there. Political crimes and assassinations. I don't think you even spelled that right, but anyway, have been carried out lately by a variety of left-wing liberal scum who support Banderite Kiev, FICO, Kirk, FICO? Okay, anyway, who's next? Maybe it's time for the MAGA team to realize that by supporting Ukraine, they're supporting murderers. So, anyway, let's move on to the next bit here. Utah Governor Spencer Cox has warned of, yeah, this was very true too. Russian and Chinese bot activity on social media aimed at fueling unrest and polarizing the public.
Bots from Russia.
Let me turn that down a little bit.
Our team, the state team, and I'm sure the federal team as well, what we're seeing is our adversaries want violence. China, we have bots from Russia, China, all over the world that are trying to instill disinformation and encourage violence.
That is true. I mean, it is in their interest for us to turn into civil conflict. Because a state that has.
I mean, that's basically the only way. That's the only way China could make a move on Taiwan is
exactly.
if the U.S. descends into civil conflict.
China does not want the war to end in Ukraine because that means that America and Europe can reorient their entire attention towards the South China Sea. The European fleets are nothing to like scoff at. Like Britain has 2 carriers. Italy has 1. France has 1 or 2 now. Even the German fleet has pretty good subs. Spain, I think, has their own carrier too, if I remember, or at least they're working towards it. So between that, between all those nations, they're not as big as like, the goodness, not the Nimitz, the Ford class carriers, right? They're not even half as big as ours, but those are still pretty big carriers, man. You can still bring a lot of firepower with the coalition of NATO fleets if they're backed up by the American fleets, the Japanese, and a shore-based defense by Taiwan. China's fucked. I don't care how many drones and missiles you got. You got that much air power, sea power, and just pure tonnage. You're not going to have a chance in anywhere of invading another island. So, with what they're trying to do here is trying to, again, create political problems in every every country domestically, and also keep the war going in Ukraine because that's Europe's primary concern. Creating division between America and Europe is also another major concern for China and Russia. Again, it all makes sense once it's broken down, but it's surprising how little people actually kind of think about these things. Because the information we get, it has a desired outcome. By creating divisions in America, that helps out them, but at the same time, people might get confused of like, well, aren't you for a sort of revolutionary movement in America? Like, yes, but the motivation has to be owned by us. It can't be co-opted by a foreign interest. A classic example of this would be Charles Bausman, his connections to Konstantin Malafiev and the Russian state. We've documented that almost ad infinitum at this point on this show, but that is a case of a Russian asset propping up a dissident movement in America that solely focuses on the JQ. White nationalism isn't just about the JQ. There are other threats, there are other things that we have to work on, and if you're not coming from a pro-white perspective, you're not a person I want in my circle. If you're solely focused on just the JQ and that one segment of the larger problem we have to deal with, you're a liability. But that's what they want us to focus on. So there's a whole
there's instigators from a lot of foreign countries.
Yeah.
That are doing a lot of stupid things a lot of things to try and get Americans to do stupid things at this point.
Right.
And I think that's one of the biggest risks the federal government's actually facing as far as foreign adversaries. I don't know. I mean, like, theoretically, you could try to region lock Twitter. That would be a good start, but that'd be tricky.
It would be a little tricky. Let's finish up this thread here, though. Since a few days ago, Russia-linked public figures and influencers have been accusing Israel of being involved of Charlie Kirk's murder, though there is not enough evidence to support this claim as of right now. This is coming from Candace Owens and Mike Flynn. Candace Owens, Megyn Kelly also saying she was threatened and intimidated and pressured of Israel and who to platform. She also confirms Charlie experienced the same nefarious pressure. Thank you, Megan. Daylight is the best disinfectant. Mike Flynn used to be a colonel. I'm pretty sure Trump promoted him for political reasons. Um, he's a well-known Russian asset. I don't need to get into any further with him, but I think I watched an interview with him one time where he was saying that Kherson would never fall because Russia owns it, and literally the next day it was liberated by the Ukrainians. So he is far from a reliable military leadership. So let me just move that up a little bit here. Okay, let's get to the last couple of bits here. Additionally, Kirk was one of the most influential U.S. conservative Zionists. Killing him would make no sense. Um, I think me and Cappy both agree that his rhetoric was changing on that pretty quickly. Um, Historically, yes, no, he was avidly a Zionist to even my own chagrin. I actually hated Kirk for quite a long time because of his stance on Israel and the way he was trying to create a multiracial Christianity in America. I think over time, there was just so many people going into TPUSA just because of the volume of people in America that are white and have a healthy self-interest in preserving their own race in this country. He had to change his rhetoric, and maybe there was some sort of perspective change on that. I don't know. But rhetorically, he was taking a risk and alienating his primary donors by doing that, though. At the same time, he cannot ignore that base, though. So there was an interesting, again, another balance he had to find there. But anyway, additionally, Kirk was one of the most influential U.S. conservative Zionists, and killing him make no sense. Claims that he was about to turn on Israel and was therefore killed also lack clear evidence as of now. Yes, this coming from Alex Jones, Max Blumenthal, Tucker Carlson. Let's go to the next one here. The American Communist Party in particular. More facts about the ACP. Its position towards Russia and China is documented ties to the former. 3 posts shown in the image can be found in a thread attached to the last post. Founders being Haz Aldana and Jackson Hinckley, like we talked about. Yes, we did talk about the International Anti-Fascist Forum in Russia, which was hosted in Moscow. These guys go to Russia quite frequently for that. Yeah, and the other interesting correlation between uh, dissident parties in the West, one, they often want to focus strictly on the Jews. Two, they want a reduction in any military defense budget. God, what's his name from Austria? He married that American girl. I forgot his name. Anyway, when the war started in Ukraine, he was saying, no, we need to open up the pipelines for Nord Stream 2, and we need to decrease the defense budget for the Bundeswehr, and all these things. Like, we shouldn't be involved in war, all this stuff. But then they always talk about NATO as their primary concern, when it's the EU, as any nationalist would be worried about, because it's the austerity measures that the EU imposed on, say, Greece and many other countries that affects the social and familial nature of any nation. If you have less money, you have less chance for having kids and all this sort of thing. That affects the stability of domestic life. NATO is not really a huge thing on most nationalist terms if they're worried about their own domestic problems in like Greece, Romania, Poland, or England, right? Um, they're worried about the EU. So when you hear this rhetoric from them, they're coming from a state-sponsored point of view, because Russia's worried about NATO, not an actual nationalist outlook. So Tyler Robinson, the ACP. Right-wing influencer Nick Fuentes claims the ACP members tried to frame the killer as one of his followers, and repeats the claim by Steven Crowder that Tyler Robinson was part of the ACP Discord server. The server was reportedly wiped shortly after the assassination of Kirk. The founder of the ACP responds to that the ACP doesn't have a Discord. It quickly mentions that a linked Discord server does indeed exist, and it apparently gets wiped regularly. Aldin admits that the server was wiped after the assassination. So, a possibility, an intriguing thread on some evidence there. I don't see any connections between Robinson. I mean, being in a public server doesn't really make you a member of a thing, right? It'd be like if I'm trying to think, if I was a subscriber to, I don't know, I'm trying to think of a example. If I had the GOP's weekly, monthly newsletter or whatever, right? Does that make me a Republican? If I vote for Trump, does that make me a Republican? Not really. And if someone votes for somebody, that means that means that Kamala Harris was complicit in the assassination because Tyler Robinson voted for her or something. It doesn't really make much sense. These are very open public spaces that people can walk into and out of. Yeah, maybe there's sympathy. It's certainly a ideological framework, I think, and that's where people ought to have to deal with now. Is that how do you kill an idea? The idea of anti-fascism has a long history, and the way the militant side of the left has tried to frame that is also a classic example is the John Brown Gun Club. Um, I'm surprised. Example of what John Brown, who he was. He was an abolitionist in the 1850s. And in Missouri, he went to I forgot what armory it was called, but he went to liberate some guns and give it to some slaves. And
Yep.
and he was fairly successful. It was actually a successful raid on the armory he went to. I forgot the name of it. But then he went and caused a lot of problems for the Missouri state government. And that's what they named their gun club after. Yeah, as a form of actually fascism and that sort of thing. So they're trying to tie in American history with that. At the same time, the right wing has to also work within their own historical narratives of manifest destiny. And I feel like I'm getting off the tangent here, but
Yeah, a little bit.
we'll leave it at that because we need to speak about Christian nationalism and that sort of thing. I'm sorry, guys. What would a white nationalist podcast be if we didn't have autism and tangents? But okay, sorry. Let's just bang the door down on Christian nationalism and your insights into it there. So go ahead, Cap.
Okay, so this is something I've wanted to talk about for a little while, because I think it's interesting and I think it's important. Um, so, and we're going to get into a little bit of a background on moral philosophy here. Um, one of the one of the fundamental flaws that we've seen over the 20th and early 21st century is the failure of the materialist worldviews.
Mhm.
So the materialist worldviews are fascism, liberalism, and communism. And people are going to fight me about that, which I respect. Um, but I am pretty solid in my belief on this one. So if you can make a convincing argument, though, I will listen to you. A convincing argument was made to me as to this being a good way to examine the world, and so this is what I've adopted. So you have a pagan mindset which is highly tribal, and fascism adopts the pagan mindset but attempts to expand it to the scale of the nation state. Then you've got a purely economic mindset, which is communism, which ends up turning the bureaucratic organization of the state into the moral system. It turns that into God. Fascism turns the nation, which is to say the racial and spiritual through line of the nation state, into its moral arbiter, and liberalism turns the self into its moral arbiter. Um, and the reason why Christian nationalism, I'm going somewhere with this, I promise. The reason why it seems that Christian nationalism is growing so much more in such a more healthy way in comparison to the more radical elements of the right is because Christianity is one of what I've referred to as universalist religions. And that is to say, it's an operating system that allows the mass organization of people around a structured spiritual ideal, by effectively radically simplifying the pagan gods, which are expressions of the human experience. And so by radically simplifying the human experience into ways that large swaths of people can identify with, Christianity, it allows people to organize at or above the level of a nation state, especially if you look at like the Crusades and Christendom and the German states, because the German states were always fighting with each other, but they had very strong concepts of like fair play, of judgment by an impartial arbiter in many ways. Of course, you would always go to your liege lord, but then the church had power over the liege lord. But the emperor had a lot of sway in how the courts worked in the church. And so many of our modern conceptions of the way a nation state functions evolved from the German Holy Roman Empire states, where the church, the state, and the populace were all separate, groups with separate interests that were all politically active. And in that way, Christianity, circa like 600, 700 AD, really managed to find a way to unify all of these disparate groups, which is why it was so stable for so long, why you had Europe as this foundational, extremely stable social environment for so long. So that's the background. Now, looking ahead, what we've seen is we've seen the growth of Christian nationalism, with many different interpretations of the right way to do it. So you definitely have like my interpretation of God might forgive you, but I won't. Um, and then you've got the evangelical interpretation, with which I radically disagree. And then you've got, your Eastern Orthodox, your Catholics, and whatnot. But at a foundational level, an Eastern Orthodox, sort of racial nationalist can get along relatively well. I mean, they'll have their disagreements, but they'll stand shoulder to shoulder when it's time to throw down, and they can get along relatively well with even some of these relatively wacky, evangelical ideas to a point. There's I don't get me started on like Methodists or some of the properly heretical factions, because I do think that those exist. You get your rainbow flag waving churches that are just causing problems for everyone, and we all know it. But they've also divorced themselves from Christianity, and they're just liberals. They're just liberals that happen to be in a church. They are a different philosophical worldview. So back to the origin. The reason why the hard right has a lot of trouble gaining traction is because while pagan ideals and fascist ideals are very appealing to young men, especially in the position of a national tribe, that's very appealing. Um, it presents a problem because they have a very hard time organizing together. In the case of pure fascism, they don't have a strong enough nation, especially not in the United States, in order to organize around that as a moral through line, because you have the US is like 7 different cultural blocks and none of them get along well. Um, and then from a more pagan perspective, you will never find a more contentious group of individuals than a bunch of pagans with chips on their shoulders, and they will fight amongst each other because the maximum size of that type of tribal organization is like several thousands or tens of thousands of people. Once you get above that scale, paganism no longer serves a function to organize that large group of people onto the same moral platform. Um, and so that, again, is why I propose that Christian nationalism is probably going to end up being the most successful brand of the new right. And it's going to develop in such a way that it will be taking control of institutions before any of the more hardliner sort of um, fascist or pagan groups get actual levers of power into their hands. I think Christian nationalism, making appeals to Christian nationalism, is the best way to get what we want, as opposed to trying to institute power through less conventional means. There's a reason why Christianity was the dominant religion in Europe for closing on 2,000 years now, 1,700 years. So there's the philosophical position on why we should specifically look at Christian nationalism. And as a follow-up, anybody out there with more libertarian ideas, or even marginally libertarian ideas, you're going to have a much easier time appealing to a Christian nationalist government when it comes to ensuring civil liberties in the face of tools like Palantir and high altitude drones than you're going to be able to appeal to a fascist government. You're not going to get a pagan government. That just can't happen. There's no pagan system that has been effective at organizing people at these scales. And don't bring up India, because you're bringing up India when you do that. India is not a functional it's not a functional anything. It's like dozens of little city states that barely talk to each other. India is a really weird outlier in just about everything. But they've never conquered anyone in their entire 3,000-year history. They've always been ruled by outsiders with different moral systems. And so when you look at things this way, it becomes evident that as much as fascism can be appealing to young men, and again, I get it, and don't say I don't get it, I get it. But as much as it can be appealing to young men, the end state of fascism will end with government oligarchic control of all information, and then they'll try and use that to micromanage every single person's life, everywhere, all the time. Um, because they like the tools our government has access to now with Palantir, drone technology, mass data collection. A lot of people have described this as techno feudalism because the platforms, everybody's a renter on the platform they use. If you want to sell products, you got to sell them on Amazon, which means you're renting the platform, and your liege lord Bezos can do whatever he wants to you, um, in an economic sense, anyway. Uh, the only appeal that really counters that and permits the mass organization that would counter that is a form of Christian nationalism based on historical precedent. I can't think of another, well, if we got into power, we could, okay, that's true, but you haven't, you didn't. And if you don't get into power and instead you have an oligarchic sort of unified power structure above you, which group is going to be the best to try and make moral appeals to in order to preserve individual, like even marginal individual civil liberties? And I can't see a better group that's poised to take that position than Christian nationalists. But at the same time, we do have to work on like the weird heretical nonsense coming out of the evangelicals here and there. It's not their baseline, but there's weird shit that comes out of the evangelicals, and then you've got the Episcopalians and some of the other traditionally Christian factions that we are going to have to work on in order to unify the country in a way that is going to be effective for adhering to the interests of the majority of the population.
So to break it down there, you think that Christian nationalism, Christianity, sorry, more specifically, should be the organizing principle for a coalition of people in the country, and the there's a couple of things here I want to kind of like break down, but
Yeah, go
like
for it. Go for it.
that is the organizing principle for a lot of Americans, at least. Again, you're acknowledging the heretical and conflicting
Yes.
parts of that, though, but at the same time, it's not. I mean, it's just in the name. Christianity is a theological standpoint. It is not a organizing principle for government, though. But
Well,
but hold on.
Christian nationalism could be, but go on.
Your primary concerns on a change is that we want to retain traditional civil liberties in America, including free speech, private property, gun rights, that sort of thing, right? And
So that is one of my concerns, yes. And
right,
the
yeah,
other
yeah,
one is that we need to be able to mass organize in order to both achieve power and to make appeals to preserve
right, and
traditional Western civil liberties.
yeah, that pagan take on it is that it was not enough critical mass to affect this capitulation by the state. You need a larger
Well,
organizing principle to do that.
all right. So the problem with paganism, and you can see this when you look at individual pagan groups and how they interact with each other, is for pagan systems that because pagan systems are very much built around the experience of the tribe. And that can be a relatively large tribe like the Romans or the Visigoths, the original Romans during the Republic period. But because it's built around the experience, like the gods become representations of of different aspects of life for the tribe. Once you expand beyond a critical size for the population,
Hmm.
pagan systems have a very, very hard time cross-organizing. So you're going to have a very hard time organizing a Celtic pagan group, a Greek pagan group, and a Latin pagan group, uh, and a Nordic pagan group. They're just not going to organize together because they will immediately be morally at odds with each other. Because paganism treats intergroup conflict as a zero-sum scenario. And the times you've seen large pagan organizations in human history, I don't know what the religion of the Mongolians was, but I'm going to cite them as a
That
potential.
was Tangriism.
Okay, was it pagan? Was it
Yes, yes,
tribally
yeah, it
focused?
was
Okay,
big sky god. Yeah.
okay. Um, so the Romans are the ones that I go to immediately. The Mongolians are another great example. Even Scandinavians did this. In order for a pagan organization to reach a large mass scale for for managing a large population, it has to use extreme coercive measures, which is why you get things like crucifixions. It's why you get things like the Mongolians burning cities to the ground, because and you never
Well,
you very rarely saw that kind of
on that,
behavior in the Roman states,
on
not the
that
Roman
though.
in the Holy Roman Empire in Germany. Go
Yeah,
ahead.
yeah. Well, the Mongols had actually a very loose system of control. It was mainly just tributary states. They would
Yes.
leave most states alone after they capitulated. But
Uh,
again, the
yeah.
initial monopoly of force introduction, yeah, was mainly massacre. But sorry, go ahead though. So
Yeah.
there's a
No,
lot of there's
I
a lot of
agree with
freedom
you.
there. There's a lot of freedom there though. But yeah,
Yeah,
go
there
ahead.
is. Well, I mean, compared to modern societies, most
Yes,
historical
yes,
societies had a
yes.
lot more freedom than we do now.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Um, but my position is that the amount of coercion required for, again, I'm going to use the German states, the Holy Roman Empire, to
Hmm.
remain cohesive was far lower in terms of resource expenditure than the amount of coercion required for the Roman Empire to remain cohesive.
Hmm.
Um, because the Germans would have like the occasional guy who goes out and starts problems. But when you think about it, the German states really were just a collection of kingdoms that were always skirmishing and always having fights with each other, but unified in the face of foreign threats. Whereas for most for large pagan organizations, again, like the early Roman Empire, this is why they converted to Christianity. Um, the early Roman Empire, um, it required mass crucifixions just to keep various populations in line. Um, so my argument is, even if you get to a position where a pagan tribal group has the levers of power, they're going to need to execute extreme coercive measures to maintain the levers of power, which is where you see a necessary association between sort of post-materialist fascism and pre-Christian paganism, is that in that area, because of the organizational limits, once you have industrial technology, you require direct hands-on coercive mechanisms in order to keep the population in line, because the belief structure um, doesn't reflect the experiences of a significant percentage of the population, and because it's a zero-sum game.
Yeah, I get what you're saying. I do, but like I think there's a mix up in like the interpretation of what fascism is. Like you're taking it from a theological point of view into a political system that has a long history. But like, I'm looking at my library here. I got a couple of books from Gentile, and then I can't find it right now. There's like the Doctrines of Fascism when
Hmm.
Mussolini's foreign minister visited in the 1930s. But
Hmm.
the way he talked about fascism is that it's a political system that's uniquely Italian and evolved from the
Yes.
guilds, and like you're talking about, it was an organization of labor with the state control, well, mediating between the owners of
Hmm.
capital and the owners of labor.
Yep.
Kind of it's weird because there's overlap with syndicalism in that sense, with
There
national
is.
syndicalism with in Spain, but I don't view it so much in the lens of paganism though. It's a outgrowth of what was
Well,
traditionally Italian
I'll
economics.
give you that.
Yeah.
The reason I'm addressing both at the same time is that the new right consists basically of the pagan factions, of which there are many,
Hmm.
the fascist faction, and the Christian nationalist faction. Those are
Yeah.
sort of the three primary factions. And so that's why I'm addressing both sort of at the same time,
Hmm.
as to why I promote Christian nationalism over the other two factions, because I think it's going to be more stable in the long run. It's much easier to get normies on board with, and it's going to be much more effective because you can still make moral appeals to your leadership under a Christian system in comparison to any either of the other two systems. That's
I
my primary argument.
Yeah, if your appeal is on a moral, emotional basis, yeah, I agree with that. But at the same time, again, I'm going to go back to Azov because I just know the subject matter so
Mhm.
well. Um, what's the right term for the metaphor? It's a metaphorical story, I guess. Because so many of them were captured in the hundreds after the Battle of Mariupol, there's a few stories I've heard about the prison or prison cells they're in. It's broken into two halves basically. There's the pagan half that worships Perun, and they have their like uh, prison wall paintings and stuff like that, kind of dedicated to that pantheon of gods in the old Slavic tradition. But then the other half is the Christian half of the Azov prisoners. They have their Ukrainian Orthodox Church that they pray to God, and so and both of these guys habitat the same spaces though. And in a military sense, your pagan half is much larger than the typical like American context, right? Pagans, in my experience, being one, they gravitate towards certain fields, whether it's
Hmm.
military, martial prowess, philosophy, esoteric subjects sometimes, stuff like
Hmm.
that. So you'll find them in certain slices of life that they'll definitely be punching above their weight class, sometimes intellectually, but also just in numbers. But what you're saying though, in a general appeal, I agree. But then at the same time, if we're going to apply this appeal to certain areas, whether it's the military or activism, there has to be some sort of vein where there's an appreciation for um, that philosophical and religious point of view. I think though,
Oh, I agree. I
yeah,
mean, like, there's no reason to be Puritan about Christian
that
nationalism.
yeah. But go ahead.
Um,
Yeah, I don't want
my
yeah.
my proposal is that, provided that, especially considering it looks like Christian nationalism is the way things are going to pan out at this point, if there that the most likely route to success is with a population supermajority of Christian nationalists in comparison to the other two groups. Which is not to say that they have to be forcibly converted or anything. It's just if you have if you can't achieve a 70 to 90% unity among the general population, you're going to end up running into serious problems. And the big problem right now is that liberalism is a huge disaster, where people end up just worshiping the self and descending into hedonism. So I think that for the majority of the population, especially in the United States, Christianity is going to, whether you want it to or not, end up being the primary uh, philosophical tool that is utilized in building a new political system or interpretation, depending on how you decide to take my statements.
Hmm. Yeah, I think the appeal will have to be done in Christian context for the greater population, and the organizing principle is going to have to be along traditional American civic norms and traditions. But at the same time, any revolution is also local. It's going to have to be circumstantial towards wherever you might be, whether it's by region or by state or by county. In our own little slice of the region out here, it's divided between resource allocation, technology, and services, basically,
Mhm.
from an economic point of view. So the economic outlook and any social change through whatever soft power or hard power has to take into account the concerns of these economic groupings. And
Well,
go ahead.
and one thing that we should probably keep in mind, in terms of the long view of this, because we're going through a cycle of instability right now that will hopefully be over by the end of the 2030s. But this isn't going to be the last cycle of instability we
No.
have. But the United States is, I would argue that it's best described as it's Romanizing. The United States is converting itself from a republic to an empire through the slow centralization of power. Um, and
Well,
high technology is a wild card, but socially it seems to be moving in that direction.
I would argue it's already an empire, but the domestic institutions do not reflect that reality yet. So
Yet.
yeah, that's the threat of the Caesarism that the liberal establishment worries about, though. Trump being probably the first iteration of that, and pardon me, I don't know my Roman history that well, but there were first a few different what we call it, the populares or the populist
Yeah, the
families.
populares.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. The populist families in Rome. A few of them. The Gracchi brothers, I think, is one of them. Might be the
Yep.
first.
Yep.
Yeah, that was killed.
That's the
Yeah.
closest association to Donald Trump, with the
Right.
difference
Yeah.
being that the
Right.
assassination attempt failed.
Right. Yeah. But that would be the first iteration. It went through a few times before you got to Julius Caesar. Um, So we might see that a few times. I don't think Trump's going to be that Caesar figure, and God forbid if he is. I would much rather prefer somebody else. Yeah, but with the and with the way Charlie Kirk was killed and the rhetoric we're seeing with the consecration of blood, which evangelicals have a weird death cult mentality. That symbolism between Christ and Kirk and the spilling of the blood for a cause kind of reaffirms their point of view from a moral sense. So that is the one of the first steps in that sort of Christian nationalism, taking on a symbolism, and they have that sort of investment in the history that's happening now, right? Because a lot of evangelicals, in my experience, have a point of view of trying to see to heaven at the expense of the now, if that makes sense. They don't care if the world is set on fire because Israel decides to like wipe out
The
the Golden
evangelicals
Dome.
are a problem.
They're a
Like
death cult.
something
Yeah,
has to be kind of be done about the
yeah,
evangelicals.
yeah. Put shortly, though, they're a death cult, and they don't care what happens on the world. But now that is changing now, and their kids are changing in a new way too. It's very likely we'll see a new manifestation of Christianity in some sort of sense in this country. I don't think it has a whole lot of articulation quite yet in the public sphere. I have no idea where it's going. That's just not my wheelhouse. Um, but hopefully, with what we're seeing and a lot of the overlap we're seeing and the welcome acceptance of our rhetoric and our vernacular into these spaces now, it will take on a certain manifest destiny approach, I believe, because that was a more or less Christian point of view of civilizing the frontier, right? A lot of missions that went to Africa and North America, South America,
Yeah.
were
Well,
Christian missions. So go ahead.
yeah. All right. So here's my play. All right, guys. I understand that there's a lot of appeal in fascism. I understand there's a lot of appeal in even traditional pagan religions. But hear me out on this one. If we play our cards right, all right, even if Europe falls, if we are play our cards right, then even if Europe falls, we're okay, because our grandkids are going to be able to go on crusade to retake England.
Mm,
Okay.
okay. Well, on that, I know that's a meme, but I feel that with what we're seeing happen in Ukraine, for example, there's a lot of international volunteers going over there, and the concept of our struggle being a global struggle, because we're on 5 different continents. Um,
Hmm.
the skill sets people acquire in these conflicts is going to what's the right term? Cross pollinate amongst other
Hmm.
groups. Um, case in point would be drone warfare.
Man, that's been
Nationalists,
crazy, dude. The
yeah,
drone warfare is
it has,
nuts.
but the developments and the pioneering of new military techniques has been primarily done by a nationalist military base in Ukraine. The best forces are Azov, right sector groups, Birds Magyar. He's an interesting figure. He's much more of a civic nationalist because he's actually Hungarian, which is funny. But he's very much civically aligned Ukrainian though. He loves his country obviously, but at the same time, like these people also welcome our sort of guys. We have guys in our own chat that have tried to get into these groups and have successfully, but it's just a language problem.
Hmm.
So there is a welcoming of ideas to be brought from other nations into other nations itself, and by doing this, we're allowing ourselves to kind of invent the next generation of warfare, and that means that the monopoly of force can eventually be overcome because the institutions that are supposed to do this aren't really keeping up with the trends in warfare. I watch a fair amount of stuff from like the CSI, sorry, IISS, and a few other CSI. I think it's CSI. I know people are familiar with the show with that, but it's a different institution. They're supposed to like create these strategic initiatives to like change the militaries where they're based at locally, kind of keep up with current trends, but they're very slow at doing that. And in my fair humble assessment as a humble little streamer, I think a good number of their assessments are actually wrong. They're good at looking at things after they happen, but like where they're supposed to go, it's usually just projects that require a lot of money, little innovation and are typically just not able to be scaled up. Ukraine, on the other hand, has scaled up an innovation in warfare very cheaply and very effectively. To the efficacy of drone warfare in the long term, it will
Oh my
eventually
God.
decline. It will eventually decline. But at the
I
same,
don't.
go ahead.
So here's what I'm very interested in. I want to see the next drone first strike on a nation. Because the
That will
first
happen with
strike
China.
that
That will
could
happen
have
with China. Go ahead.
probably, but the first strike that could have targeted the Russian like nuclear triad in Vladivostok of all places, man, that was nuts.
Yeah, that was the Ukrainska air base that actually that truck caught fire, if I remember right. So that wasn't
Yeah.
actually a. I mean, they tried. They didn't get out that far, but
No, they
yeah.
didn't really, well, they weren't really aiming for the atomic bombers anyway.
No, well,
But the fact that you
capable.
could do that
Yeah,
has fundamentally changed like the nature of state warfare, I think, at this point. It's
right.
become a lot more accessible to do damage and it's become a lot more difficult to defend. Um, I think drones are going to continue to be effective for quite some time.
Hmm.
I
But it.
don't.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
I think that the only serious risk is I keep on hearing something go ping, 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 and I'm not touching anything.
That's
So,
not me. I don't hear anything. Sorry.
okay. All right. Maybe it's maybe my microphone's being weird. Anyway, so the it's incredibly difficult to defend against domestic drones. And if you can get drones into your opponent's country, then you can you can do focused precision attacks on very valuable bits of infrastructure, and it's very hard to defend because you can't just turn on the jammers all the time. In terms of like warfront, with trench lines and whatnot, like we're seeing in Ukraine, the I do expect that drones are going to become less effective, but I also expect they're going to become more expensive. We are going to see the deployment of proper AI systems in drones, especially for counter drone warfare. So you're going to end up with drones over the trenches like we used to have aircraft over the trenches in World War One.
Possibly. I just saw a recent article where Ukraine has developed a drone for under $500 that has supposedly an advanced AI suite that's capable of targeting other drones. So you're not too far off the mark on that. But at the same time, AI is a vernacular I think that's kind of abused at this point. It's anything that has software that can do a functionality. Like I
Okay, when I say AI, what I mean is a dynamic digital neural network that's designed to perform a specific task.
sure,
So,
sure, yeah, and that's hard to. Yeah, I mean, like I have people telling me that Google Maps is a feature of AI. I'm like, sure, dude. Anyway, but anyway, I think that AI is a good tool. It is a search function with a predetermined algorithm. That's all it really is. It has a single
mhm.
function, a lot of capacities, but like it has a very singular function, and it's not really far different from many programs we already have. Creating a self-generating AI system close to impossible, I think, and it's still working in a language that only speaks in a binary true-false dichotomy. It's not capable of the nuance or even capable of lying to itself like the human mind is, which is an entirely different paradox, I guess. Really, people can emotionally believe one thing and also another thing that's in conflict with both of those statements, though. A computer cannot do that. Um, how
Yeah,
that?
so
Go ahead.
um, AI functions like a highly specialized region of a biological brain. Um, so you don't do the mathematics to catch a ball when somebody throws one to you. You just catch it,
Hmm.
and that's how AI functions. So it's not capable of abstract reasoning or thought at all. It will just do kind of what it's programmed to do. Modern large language model systems are basically if you had a mouse that instead of finding food did word prediction. Like it can't think abstractly. Honestly, it thinks less than a mouse, but it's very good at word prediction. It's done it so many times. The pathways are there. When it sees a word, it knows what word goes next, just automatically. but it's not capable of understanding what those words mean. AI is not sapient. It's not an abstract thinker. It cannot. It's very limited on the battlefield to there's a thing, hit it.
Yeah, do you have any final thoughts on Christian nationalism before we reach the bottom of the stacks subjects we wanted to talk about?
Um, Not really. I'd say if you're not somehow involved, get involved, join a church, do something like that. I get that there's going to be some people that are extremely resistant to this, especially pagans with chips on their shoulders. I respect that that this is not in your wheelhouse. But for people who are not sure what they should be doing, or people who want to get involved, or just advice to give other people when they ask what they should be doing, one of the very valuable things that you could do is you can join a church for the purposes of networking. And you can join a church, especially a good church. Like, don't, if they have a rainbow flag out front, don't join that church. They're going to be a bunch of old farts anyway. When you join a church, look for a church with like a bunch of kids floating around the pews being annoying. That's the kind of church you want to be in. But join a church, join a Turning Point USA chapter or something like that. Um,
Or even a college
one of the
Republicans
best,
chapter at this point if you're young
yeah,
enough. Yeah.
one of the best things that you can do is you can liaise between underground new right groups like sort of your organizations, and public facing, more traditional,
Right.
conservative groups like Turning Point USA, like um, politically active churches, um, Republican committees. If you really want to go there and get directly involved in politics, that's an option too. But being able to liaise between multiple groups is going to be incredibly valuable here very soon,
Yeah.
because all of these groups are going to be growing, and they're all going to need to coordinate with each other. So you do that, maybe start a nonprofit on the side, and you can become one of the key members of like 3 or 4 different organizations in a key organizational node without ever having to, without sacrificing, more than the occasional weekend. It's amazing how easy it is to do things if you just show up.
Yeah, and I have to. It's also very hard to get people out on the weekends sometimes for various reasons, but that's a personal gripe
Yeah.
with people I've talked to on the East Coast, Midwest, West Coast.
Hmm.
Yeah. Let's get to the bottom of the stack stuff here. You were mentioning the networking there just briefly. The classic example, which comes to mind for a lot of people, is the time of troubles, whether
Hmm.
it was the flying or the early 1920s or the revolution 1916 in Ireland or into the 60s and 70s or even
Hmm.
90s really. Sinn Féin being the public-facing organization for the IRA, and then the factions of the IRA underground, whether it's the Provos or the Communists or Social Dems. There's a plethora of people, right? If there was to be a time of troubles in America, there would be factions within factions. There would be people that would be strictly focused on the public outreach and public facing side of things, and people would be on the militant side of things, doing the underground networking and doing all that sort of stuff. The IRA is kind of an interesting topic for me. I've read more than enough books on it at this point, but it's not a true facsimile of what I think would be in America, though, because Belfast is, I mean, that the 6 counties are extremely small compared to the continental size of America. The networking would have to be gargantuanly more huger in scale, and I just don't
It
think
would
we're
have to
at
be
that point.
huge. It would have to be the hugest, the most
Biggest,
huge anyone has ever seen.
yeah, I mean, it would be a monumental feat of communications and networking that I don't think has ever really been accomplished by the right wing, outside of like state apparatuses. So that's something that might have to be pioneered, but that's a whole different topic. I feel that in any conflict in America, it would have to come down to, again, the local organizations and how people are able to stay within their own their rules of engagement, and how much effect that's going to have in the near future that we have no idea about. Um, Sorry, I was just looking at some of my IRA books while I was putting away my Gentile books there. I want to, hmm. There's a lot of things I want to say on that, but I just want to kind of put that to the side right now. You were asking about. I'm sorry. We have a couple of things here I want to talk about also. Pika Knight says drones will be big until counters hard counter them, or nations are willing to field massive armies again. Um,
Well, nations are not going to be willing to field massive armies again within the foreseeable future.
I disagree with that actually.
Hmm.
Yeah, I mean we've seen that change with Poland. They're getting up to what 300,000 people under arms, close to. I think they want to push to 500,000 eventually. With a shrinking demographic, Russia they want 1.5 million people in their army. Ukraine has close to 1 million people under arms right now. And you see even the Bundeswehr that says they want to increase their armed forces to I think 300,000. UK for some reason just can't get out of their. I'm sorry. I feel like I'm attacking not Saxon here accidentally, but I'm not. But the British Army, I think the whole of their armed forces is not bigger than 80,000 people. And that's just like mind-bogglingly small for me to comprehend. It's like they're even converting their Marines to become special forces. I'm just like, why? You have the SAS. But beside the point, England being the one example of what you're saying, most armies now are going to be increased in size because we're moving out of the paradigm of the dividend of peace, as they called it after 1991, and with the
I agree that armies are going to be increasing in size, but I don't think that nations are going to be willing to throw people away. Like the value of a soldier is going up dramatically for demographic reasons. So they will want to orient towards mechanization, drones, small teams if possible at all. And based on the appearance of modern warfare in like Ukraine, it does appear that's possible.
I you okay, it's a complicated question because I have to break down tactics and operational stuff here, but you are correct in the idea that large massed formations are not going to be the the current trend of warfare. I believe that's simply because people and generalships or general staffs, whatever you call them, cannot account for the effect of the tactics that drones have affected on the battlefield. Until that is adopted and overcome, or adapted and overcome, sorry, um, it's going to come down to what we see what the Russians doing, moving into drone defensive spaces. Though they rely on infiltration, small tactic warfare, and they switch between platoon-sized elements down to fire teams or solitary soldiers sometimes, depending on what they can find in these what do you call that? Force, sort of recon and force sort of things. They'll go out and probe lines, but they'll at the same time it's also a cultural thing. Russia has a very healthy culture of poverty, where they'll take their impoverished people and throw them at the front line because that's a feature of their system. It's not a bug. They can just toss these what do you call that? The lumpen proletariat of Russia, so to speak, at the
Hmm.
Ukrainians and try to probe the lines, find the gap, and then move in your trained soldiers as your second tier to go and exploit the gap if they can. Um, that is a Russian way of warfare, whereas with the West, Ukraine being a new member of that, they they appreciate what you're saying though. They appreciate the individual life of the soldier and the value that a trained soldier can bring to the battlefield, which is true.
Well,
That's
there's a reason why they don't want to conscript anybody below the age of what,
25,
26?
25, 25.
25. They
Yeah, yeah,
lowered it.
yeah. It's very true. But at the same time, you still need people to hold that line to fill those gaps. So there will be large armies, but until that drone warfare is accounted for into a mobile warfare doctrine, it will devolve down into small fire teams and platoon-sized elements for the most part. Um, but that is also being worked on though. Ukraine is adopting a new mode of uh, a structural hierarchy of brigades within a corps system. So after the war, possibly we'll see the evolution of something new in the organization of modern arms and how that force organization chart looks like. And around that, you'll have a doctrine developed for new mobile warfare, possibly with drones incorporated into that new doctrine. But that's down the road, and maybe will take years to hammer out. But I would say it's not because that is the demographics or politics. It's because of the failure to account for drone warfare that we're seeing manifest in Ukraine. is small teams because they don't know what else to do. People are just hunkering down and sending out the expendables, at least on Russia's side, towards Ukraine to go and try to make some sort of movement on the map. Ukraine is trying to preserve that manpower as best as possible with that drone line defense. But yeah, that's it, I guess. You were oh yeah, I did have one thing sent to me by Alex here. This was related to the morality of evil. Let me just bring that up really quick here. So I'll read this. It's just a couple of pages, guys. Yeah, quote, in fact, what would non-resistance mean in the sense of absence to any resistance? This would mean accepting evil, letting it in and giving it freedom, scope, and power. If under these conditions the uprising of evil occurred and non-resistance continued, it would mean subordination to it, a surrender to this of the self to it, participation in it, and finally turning oneself into its instrument, into its body, into its cesspool, if its plaything and absorbed element thereof. It would be a voluntary self-corruption and self-infection at the start, and the active spread of infection among other people, sorry, and their involvement in its coordination by the end. But he who does not resist evil at all, who refrains from denouncing it or giving it reprimand, even through quite internally focused and silent, if that was possible, is already engaged in internal resistance fraught with practical conclusions and tensions, struggle and opposition. Moreover, for however long there is a dislike in the soul, or at least a vague disgust, then that person still resists. He perhaps does not rise up in any way, but he is still divided. He fights within himself, and as a result, the very acceptance of evil fails him. Even while completely passive and externally, he resists evil internally, condemns it, is indignant, exposes it before himself, does not succumb to its fears and temptations, and even succumbing in part reproaches himself for it. Gathers with the spirit, resents himself, turns away. Sorry, let me find my spot again. Turns away from it and is purified in repentance. Even when drowning, he resists and does not sink. But this is not. The total absence of all resistance, both external and internal. Requires the condemnation to both be stopped, so that censure will cease, so that the approval of evil will prevail. So that the non-resistor of evil, sooner or later, at the need to assure himself that evil is not so bad and that it is not so definitely evil, that it has some positive features, and therefore are many that and there are many of them, that they may even predominate. Sorry, this is very wordy, guys. And only insofar as he manages to talk himself out of voting his healthy disgust and assurances of black and white, does he discuss the remnants of resistance and self-realization. And when aversion subsides, and evil is no longer experienced as evil, the acceptance imperceptibly becomes total. The soul begins to believe that black is white, adapts to match, becomes black itself, and finds that it approves and enjoys. And of course, this gives evil great pleasure. This is from Ivan Alexandrovich Ilyin on the resistance to evil by force. This was sent to me by Alex. I'm sorry, it was kind of wordy, but that's kind of how philosophy breaks down now. You kind of have to kind of go over the reflection of the self and the relationship of the self to the soul. So, I think he dropped out there. Okay, sorry. Cappy's coming back in, guys, from dropping out there by accident. You there, Cappy?
I'm back.
Okay,
I
cool.
dropped.
Yeah. So yeah, that's just a reflection on evil and the relationship to the self of to evil itself, though. It has to go through the acceptance of the self to compromise with it, though. Also, I see that a lot. Also, again, like what we're talking about earlier with Charlie Kirk's wife, Erica. The forgiveness is kind of the first step in accepting that sort of evil. That's the danger of it, though. Not condemning it, not fighting it, is an evil in of itself. I'll put that succinctly.
Yeah, to tolerate evil is an act of weakness. A good man does not tolerate evil is the best way to put it.
Yeah.
There's a lot of ways you can handle it, but the behavior of the progressives at this point is absolutely abhorrent, and everybody knows it. It's not that they wanted Charlie Kirk dead; it's that they wanted everybody who thinks the way that he does dead, and that is about 100 million voting Americans.
Pika Knight says, no, sorry, my fat little retard toe. Okay, retarded toe. Says, are clay pigeon shooters the soldiers of the future? Wouldn't hurt though. Yeah, the whole concept of warfare is almost philosophical at a certain point though, because no one really knows how far the efficacy of drones is going to go. I would say at a certain point, just as a case in point, uh, electronic warfare has become very advanced between the Russians and Ukrainians. So radio frequencies are becoming very hard to use. I won't get all the science behind it, but that's why both sides are now relying on fiber optics, because it's a hard line. You can't really jam that. But the danger behind that, though, I've seen some videos from some Ukrainian outlets on YouTube. Because it's a fiber optic line, you can find these lines and shoot a laser through because it's a conduit for light, and that light transmission through the cable goes right back to the drone operator. So that's a liability. Now, if you could come up with a how to put it, I'm trying to think of the right term for it because there's an artillery system for this. If you can identify target and kill the target and confirm it too in a very short kill chain. Sorry, that's the right term. That would kill the fiber optic drone operators very quickly, and that would become a liability, and then that tactic would eventually disappear. So, but both sides are working on that right now because both sides do use fiber optics though, and then if fiber optic drones are dispensed with as a tactic in Ukraine, then they'll fall back to FPV drones, and they're already having problems with radio frequencies like we talked about because of electronic warfare. That efficacy will drop off. So that's just one example.
Well, yeah, so the downside of using electronic warfare or jamming is that you can jam your own signals. So you end up with this sort of race between who can swap their frequencies the fastest and more randomly. And you can jam everything but the frequencies you're using, but then the enemy can figure out what frequencies you're using and use those.
Well, that's why you would have typically a radio frequency hopping feature. But the problem with that is that you need to have a controller with what's called the time of day, which is the key for all comms plans, because that's what it would be, to sync all that up on the same cycle. It has to all be very synchronized, because if you're off by a few milliseconds, your interoperability, if that's the right term, falls apart. Because if you're jumping between 6 signals and you're off by half a second, it's useless. It's absolutely useless. So anyway, it's just an example. But yeah.
Yeah.
You have another point there?
Well, no, I'm saying that domestically drones are going to become they're going to become both very hard to defend against, and I'm really looking forward to the federal court case that says explosive FPV drones are definitely covered under the Second Amendment.
Yeah. Last thing I think we should talk about, you were asking about Venezuela earlier?
Yeah, I was curious about what's going on with Venezuela.
Okay. Succinctly put, it's gunboat diplomacy. We talked on the show, I think 3 weeks ago, 4 weeks ago, the deployment of the carrier group out there. It's 1 LHD, 2 LPDs, which are landing dock ships, essentially, and then the LHD, which is a helicopter dock ship, is the term for that. It, again, just kind of, and what, two or three destroyers, a cruiser, and a boomer sub, which is capable of launching cruise missiles, along with like 2,000 Marines. So it's not enough to force regime change, but it's certainly enough to put pressure on the domestic politics of, let me get my video that we were both laughing at earlier, the domestic politics of Venezuela. And because of that, he's been training up his militia in a rather funny way.
That video is hilarious.
I'm trying to find it again. I have to scroll through my video dump here we have for the show. I might put it on my channel. 1 second. Let me just find it again. Videos. Yeah, here we go. So let me just bring this up on the Telegram viewer. We'll probably end on this video, guys. But yeah, not really worried about a bush war in Venezuela, but this is how Venezuela is training up to fight U.S. Marines.
I love this video. This is some funny shit.
I mean, that is... It takes effort to get that fat, dude.
Especially in Venezuela.
Right? Where's all the food you're eating, man? Anyway, God, sorry. Latin America is such a weird place. It's not as fucked up as Africa, but it's certainly fucking weird. Anyway, all right, guys, let me just check all the chats here before we close out today. We had a good turnout on Odyssey and X today, so appreciate everyone over there. Entropy, a couple people, and Rumble, a few people too. So glad to see you all. The replays will be up shortly, and yeah, thank you guys for showing up and giving us your questions and comments. My fat little retarded toe says, before this ends, please tell Cappy that Elmo is watching. He'll get it. Yeah, I get what you're saying.
Yep. Okay.
Yeah. All right, guys. Please like and share the show after the replays are up. Do you have any last comments before we step off, Cappy? Cappy?
Nope, I don't have any last comments.
Okay.
I thought you were asking the audience.
No, I was asking. Sorry.
Okay. Nope, I think I'm pretty good. Like I said, things are moving fast right now. We're going to attain a new metastable political state probably here in the next month, and then we'll wait for the next once in a lifetime thing in maybe a year or less.
Okay. All right, guys. For everyone else in Ukraine, good hunting and Godspeed. Stay safe. Winter's coming soon, and it's probably raining there already. Things will probably get a little bit safer, but you'll also have less foliage to cover yourself from drones. So just be safe, hunker down, and hopefully the war ends soon. For everyone else in the West, go and do some good this week. Go to, if you're in America or hell, even Australia, go to a Charlie Kirk memorial. Really, just go and talk to some randos and do some good. You know, just go have a talk with somebody new, right? Somebody outside your circle this week. All right, guys. We will be back next week, I think, with the normal show, and I'll try to catch up the last 2 weeks in the PowerPoint as usual. All right. Have a good week.
Today for the
Have
third
a great
time in
day.
2 years is infamous mafia don Papa Joe Iacovetta. Iacovetta takes the stand to defend himself against allegations of his involvement in the ordered killings of no less than 17 men. The state's case against him relies heavily on circumstantial evidence, and a third acquittal has already been predicted.
Never shall innocent blood be shed, yet the blood of the wicked shall flow like a river. The three shall spread their blackened wings and be the vengeful striking hammer of God.
I was with my mother. We were at Genovese, the butcher, because on Thursdays she makes agnolotti for...
Mr. Iacovetta, you will demonstrate order in my courtroom. Counsel, proceed.
Look at his charisma. He's the next John Gotti. He'll walk, even with all this evidence. Look, all Iacovetta's people are on the left. All the families and the men he's killed are on the right. Everyone wants some justice.
I don't know where I was. Am I a...
Doesn't have a care in the world. He's gonna walk.
You to the back! Drop your gun! One at a time, now! Drop it! What are you taking? What are you doing? What are you doing? Shut the fuck up! Get to the back! You people have been chosen to reveal our existence to the world. You will witness what happens here today, and you will tell of it later. All eyes to the front.
Now's a good time to fucking...
Shut your fucking mouth! You must watch, dear. It'll all be over soon. Now you will receive us. Would you not ask for your poor or you're hungry? We do not want your tired and sick. It is your corrupt we claim. It is your evil that will be sought by us.
With every breath, we shall hunt them down. Each day, we will spill their blood till it rains down from the skies.
Do not kill, do not rape, do not steal. These are principles which every man of every faith can embrace.
These are not polite suggestions. These are codes of behavior. And those of you that ignore them will pay the dearest cost.
There are varying degrees of evil. We urge you lesser forms of filth, not to push the bounds and cross over into true corruption, into our domain.
But if you do, one day you will look behind you and you will see we three. And on that day, you will reap it.
And we will send you to whatever God you wish.
And shepherds we shall be, for thee, my lord, for thee. Power hath descended forth from thy hand. Wherefore we swiftly carry out thy command. So we shall flow river forth to thee, and teeming with souls shall it ever be. In nomine Patri,
et Filii, Spiritus Sancti.
How far are we going to take this, Star?
The question is not how far. The question is, do you possess the Constitution? The depth of faith to go as far as is needed?